I still don't tell this story at dinner parties. People think you're making it up. They lean back with that little smile, the one that says sure, mate, and then the queen herself walked in. So I mostly keep it to myself. But you asked, and it's the truth. Every word of it happened, and I was close enough to smell the rain on that man's coat when it was over. Let me start with the strange part, so you'll stay. There is a moment, I've thought about it 1,000 times, when a room full of very rich, very calm people realizes all at once that they are not safe. It doesn't happen with a scream. It happens with silence. The kind that falls between two heartbeats. And in that silence, when everybody else in that gold and cream auction room went pale and still, there was one man who did not move a single muscle. Not his eyes. Not his hands. Nothing. He'd been standing by the wall for 3 hours like a piece of the furniture. And when the world outside cracked open, he was the only thing in that building that held its shape. But I'm ahead of myself. Let me tell it properly. It was a Thursday in late autumn, the kind of London day where the sky can't decide what it wants. Gray since morning. That thin drizzle that isn't really rain, it just sort of hangs in the air and gets into your collar. I remember the pavement outside was dark and shiny with it, and the taxis went past with that hiss the wet roads make. I was 24 then. I worked at an auction house in Mayfair called Harrogate and Vane. If you don't know Mayfair, picture the most polite part of London. Old buildings, black doors, brass plaques, flowers in the windows. The sort of street where a cup of coffee costs what a normal person pays for lunch. Harrogate and Vane had been there for 140 years, and they never let you forget it. I wasn't anybody important. I was a junior porter, which is a fancy word for the young lad who carries things and doesn't drop them. I moved paintings. I set out chairs. I stood at the back and kept my mouth shut. On a good day, somebody remembered my name. My name's not important to the story anyway. Just picture a nervous kid in a cheap suit that didn't fit right in the shoulders. That particular Thursday was not a normal day, and everyone in the building knew it. Because that afternoon at 3 o'clock, we were selling the Ellsmere Crown. Now I have to tell you about the crown, because the whole thing turns on it. The Ellsmere Crown had belonged to the late Queen. Not a famous piece you'd see in a museum with a rope around it. This was more private than that. It was a personal crown, a smaller one, the kind a queen wears not for a coronation but for quiet evenings, private portraits, that sort of thing. Silver frame, older than anyone living. Set into it were sapphires the color of deep water, and in the very center, one large stone that people whispered about but nobody could quite name. The old queen had loved it. That much was known. She'd worn it in a painting that hung, for years, in a corridor most people never walked down. And when she died, the crown went, like a lot of things go when the powerful die, into a fog of paperwork and family and lawyers. Somehow, after all of that, it ended up here, to be sold, privately, to the highest bidder in a room of maybe 40 people. I want you to understand something. Selling a thing like that is not normal. Half the people in London who cared about such matters thought it should never have been for sale at all. There'd been letters in the papers. There'd been a small crowd outside that morning with damp cardboard signs, standing in that miserable drizzle, saying it belonged to the nation and not to some auctioneer's hammer. And there had been, since 8 o'clock that morning, a royal guard standing inside our building. That was the part nobody could stop talking about downstairs. See, because the crown was still, technically, crown property until the sale went through, there was some legal knot about it. Ownership passing on the fall of the hammer. The palace had sent a guardsman to accompany it, to stand with it, to make sure that until the moment it legally left royal hands, it was never, not for 1 second, unguarded by the crown. I'd never seen one up close before. You see them outside the palaces, behind the black railings, in the red tunics and the tall bearskin hats, and the tourists take photos and try to make them laugh. But this one wasn't in the red tunic. He was in a dark ceremonial dress uniform, more sober, deep navy with a cap instead of the bearskin. Still unmistakable, though. Still that bearing. You know it when you see it. The straight back. The stillness. His name, I only learned it afterwards, from the sergeant who came later, was Guardsman Edwin Marsh. He came in at 8. I was setting out the folding chairs and I watched him walk across the reception hall. He didn't look around like the rest of us do when we enter a grand room. He didn't crane his neck at the chandelier. He walked straight to the position he'd clearly been told to take beside the display case at the front of the sale room to the left of the podium, and he stopped. And that was it. For 3 hours, that was it. People walked past him. Staff, early buyers, a photographer from a magazine who tried for about 10 minutes to get him to shift a few feet into better light. He didn't. He stood beside that case with his hands folded in front of him and his eyes fixed on the middle distance, and he did not move. I brought round trays of water and coffee that morning to the important guests. When I passed him, I hesitated. I don't know why. I held out the tray just a little in case. He didn't look at me, didn't blink. But, and I swear this is true, the corner of his mouth moved, just a fraction, a tiny thing. Like he was saying no thank you, son, without spending a single word on it. I moved on, but I remember thinking, that man has been standing for 3 hours and he's not tired, and I've been carrying trays for 1 and my feet already ache. There was something in it that made me stand up straighter for the rest of the day. Funny how that works. By 2:30, the room was filling up. Let me set the scene because the room matters. It was long with high ceilings, painted that soft cream and gold that old money loves. Tall windows down one side, the light coming through gray and thin. Rows of chairs, maybe 45 of them in an arc facing the podium. And at the front, on a raised stand under a small brass lamp turned low, sat the Ellsmere Crown in its glass case. When they'd uncovered it that morning, I'd heard grown adults go quiet. It caught what little light there was and gave it back doubled. Even from the back of the room, even to a lad who didn't know sapphire from sea glass, it was beautiful. Not shiny like a shop window. Deep. Like it had light stored up inside it from 100 years of being worn. The guests came in slowly. Auction people always do. They drift, they nod, they pretend they're not there for the same reason as everybody else. There was a scattering of dealers I half recognized. A museum man in a bow tie. A couple who'd flown in from somewhere, you could tell by the tans and the way they treated everybody like staff. 2 lawyers, very sharp, very quiet, who sat up at the side with their laptops and never once looked at the crown. And there was the family. I need to tell you about the family, because they were the storm before the storm. The late Queen, well, her people, her blood, weren't a united bunch. When something that valuable and that loved is left behind, it doesn't bring a family together. It splits them like a log. On one side of the front rows sat a woman I'd come to know as Lady Cordelia Ashe. She was the late Queen's grandniece, I think, or something close to it. 50s, elegant, dressed in dark green, with a face that had clearly been beautiful and was now just sharp. She sat very straight. She kept her handbag on her lap with both hands folded over it like it might try to leave. I'd overheard porters overhear everything. We're invisible, remember. I'd overheard that Lady Cordelia believed the crown should never have gone to sale, that the late Queen had promised it to her, verbally, in a garden years back. No paper, no witness that counted, just a memory and a promise and a broken heart. And on the other side, 3 rows over, sat the man who was going to buy it. His name was Victor Halloran. He represented a private trust, an overseas trust, the kind with a name that sounds like a law firm and an address in a country with good weather and better tax laws. He was maybe 60. Silver hair, dark suit, and the calmest hands I ever saw on a man. He didn't fidget. He didn't look at the crown much. He'd already decided he owned it, you could tell, and he was just here to sign for it. Lady Cordelia and Victor Halloran had never met before that day, as far as I know. But the moment she saw him, the moment somebody murmured his name to her, I watched her back go rigid. And I understood, with the certainty you sometimes just get, that this was not going to be a quiet afternoon. At 2:50, our senior auctioneer came out. Mr. Pemberton, old school, Gray suit, half-moon glasses, a voice like warm gravel. He'd been swinging the hammer at Harrogate and Vane for 30 years, and he'd sold, I once heard him say, everything but the crown jewels, and now, it seems, one of those too. He liked that line. He'd used it 3 times that week. He stepped up to the podium. He set down his little folder. He looked out over the room, and the room settled the way a class settles when a teacher they respect walks in. And beside him, unmoving, a few feet to his left, stood Guardsman Marsh. I remember Pemberton glancing at him once, just once. A little sideways look, the way you check that a landmark hadn't moved. Then he cleared his throat and he began. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming on such a dismal afternoon. Good weather is bad for the soul and worse for prices, so I'm delighted it's raining. A ripple of polite laughter, the kind rich people give. We come, he went on, and here his voice dropped that careful degree that auctioneers use when they want you to feel the money, to a lot that requires very little introduction. Lot 41, the Ellsmere Crown. And the room went still. I was standing at the back by the double doors, where the porters stand in case anyone needs anything, or in case a chair needs moving, or in case, God forbid, someone knocks over a glass of water near something worth more than a house. From back there I could see all of it, the rows of heads, the crown glowing at the front, Marsh, a dark unmoving pillar to the left of it, and the two of them, Lady Cordelia in her dark green, Victor Halloran in his dark suit, sitting like 2 ends of a wire that was about to be pulled tight. Pemberton read out the provenance, the history, who'd made it, when, for whom. He spoke about the late Queen with real care. I'll give him that. He wasn't crass about it. And when he finished, he lifted his eyes and he said the words that started everything. We'll open the bidding at £400,000. For a second, nothing. Then a paddle went up near the front, then another, and the numbers began to climb. I won't bore you with all of it. You know how an auction sounds. The little jumps, 450, 500, 550. Pemberton's voice riding along on top of it, coaxing, teasing, do I see 6? Thank you, madam, 6 I have, 650 anywhere. The room warmed up. The temperature of money rose. Victor Halloran didn't lift a paddle, not at first. He had one of the lawyers do it for him, a small tilt of a card, barely a movement. But every time the price seemed to be settling, that card tilted again and up it went. 700, 750, 8. And Lady Cordelia sat there, watching her aunt's crown, the crown she believed was hers, promised in a garden, being carried away from her, pound by pound, by a stranger with a foreign trust in calm hands. I could see her breathing change, small thing, but I saw it. At 900,000, most of the other bidders had dropped out. The dealers put their paddles down. The couple with the tans shook their heads. The museum man in the bow tie made one last brave lift and then folded, looking almost relieved. It was down to 2. Victor Halloran threw his lawyer's card. And someone at the very front I couldn't see, a phone bidder, it turned out, on the line with one of our staff, the handset pressed to her ear. 950,000, Pemberton said. Against you, sir. 950. Do I hear 1 million? The card tilted. £1 million, thank you. 1 million I have. £1 million for the Ellsmere Crown. And that was the number that broke Lady Cordelia Ashe. She stood up. You have to understand, you do not stand up at an auction. Not like that. Not in the middle of a lot. There are rules, unspoken ones, and the first of them is that you stay in your chair and you keep your feelings folded up small. Standing up in the middle of a bid is like standing up in a church during the vows. Everyone turned. Stop this, she said. Her voice wasn't loud. That was the frightening part. It was quiet and it shook, and it carried right to the back of the room where I stood. Stop this, that crown is not his to buy. Pemberton, to his credit, didn't panic. He'd seen scenes before. Madam, he said gently, I understand this is a difficult. You don't understand anything. She wasn't looking at him, she was looking at Victor Halloran. And Halloran, for the first time all afternoon, turned in his seat and looked back at her, calm, unbothered, which only made it worse. "She promised it to me," Lady Cordelia said, and now her voice cracked right down the middle. "In the garden at Ellsmere, the summer before she died. She took my hand and she said, 'Cordelia, when I'm gone, this is yours. And now you're all going to let this man, this trust, take her crown to a vault in another country where no one who loved her will ever see it again.'" Nobody moved. 45 people frozen in their chairs, the rain ticking on the tall windows. And I looked, the way you do in a crisis. You look for the calm person, you look for whoever's in charge, and I found myself looking at Guardsman Marsh. He had not moved. Not an inch. Not toward her, not away. His eyes were still fixed on that middle distance. His hands were still folded. Whatever storm was breaking in that room, it broke around him like water around a stone. And I remember thinking it clearly, he's not going to do anything. He's just going to stand there. I was wrong about that, but not yet. Victor Halloran spoke, and when he spoke, his voice was worse than shouting. It was reasonable. "Madam," he said, "I'm very sorry for your loss, truly. But there is a will and there are executors and there is a legal process, and that process has led us here. Sentiment is not ownership." He turned back to face the front. "Mr. Pemberton, the bid stands at 1 million. I'd ask you to continue." "You cold," Lady Cordelia started, and then a younger man beside her, a nephew, a son, I never worked out which, took her arm to try and ease her back into her seat, and she pulled it away. And now 2 more people were half standing, and voices were rising. And one of the lawyers was up out of his chair with a hand raised saying something about procedure and counsel. And a woman near the aisle knocked her handbag to the floor, and the clatter of it made 3 people flinch. And the whole polite golden cream calm of that room came apart at the seams, all at once, the way these things do. Not slowly, all at once. Pemberton banged his little gavel and it did nothing. "Please, please, ladies and gentlemen." I started forward from the back, because that's what you do, you go toward the trouble, even when you're a 24-year-old porter who has absolutely no idea what he's going to do when he gets there. I got maybe 3 steps. And that's when it happened. That's when the silence came. There was a sound. I've tried to describe it many times and I've never got it right. It wasn't a bang, not first. First there was a kind of deep, dull thud that you felt in your chest more than heard with your ears. A pressure, like the whole building took a sharp breath. And then the tall windows down the left side of the room went white. Not shattered, not yet, just white. A flat, hard flash of light from outside, from the direction of the park, and half a second behind it came the real sound. The enormous flat crack that I still hear sometimes when a door slams too hard. The kind of sound that doesn't come from any normal thing. The kind of sound your whole body understands before your mind does. Somewhere out beyond the buildings, out toward Hyde Park, something had exploded. The lamps flickered. One of the tall windows cracked from top to bottom with a sound like ice breaking on a pond. A woman screamed, one, sharp, and then cut off because everyone else had gone completely silent. That was the silence I told you about, right at the start. That silence that falls between 2 heartbeats when 45 people realize at the same instant that they are not safe. And in that silence, I looked at the front of the room. Lady Cordelia had frozen mid-word, one hand at her throat. Victor Halloran was half out of his seat, calm hands gone, gripping the chair in front of him. Pemberton was crouched behind his podium. The lawyers were on the floor. The couple with the tans were already scrambling toward the doors, knocking chairs over, and the panic was about to catch, you could feel it. That half second before a crowd breaks and runs and tramples, that terrible tipping moment. And Guardsman Edwin Marsh had not moved. He stood beside the case that held the Ellsmere Crown, exactly where he had stood for 7 hours, his back straight, his hands unfolding now, slowly, deliberately coming to his sides. His eyes had come off the middle distance for the first time all day. They were sweeping the room, the windows, the doors, reading it, cold and fast and completely without fear. And when he spoke, the first words I ever heard him say, his voice cut across that breaking room like a blade laid flat. 90 seconds. That's roughly how long the whole thing took, from the moment the windows went white to the moment the first police radio crackled in the doorway. I've timed it out in my head so many times since. 90 seconds. Less maybe. It doesn't sound like anything. You'll spend longer than that waiting for a kettle. But I promise you, those 90 seconds were the longest of my life, and I've had a few long ones since. Let me put you back in the room. The tall windows down the left side had cracked but not fallen. The big one nearest the front had that jagged line running top to bottom, and through it you could see nothing, really. Gray. And then, rising above the rooftops in the direction of the park, a column of dark smoke, thick and greasy, climbing into that miserable drizzling sky. Something was burning out there. Something big. Inside, the room had become a machine that was about to tear itself apart. You've never seen panic until you've seen 45 well-dressed, well-mannered, self-controlled people all decide at the same instant that the exit is the only thing in the world that matters. It's not dramatic like the films. It's uglier than that. It's clumsy. Chairs going over. A man climbing across the seat backs because the aisle was blocked. The couple with the tans already at the double doors behind me, hauling at the handles, and the doors. I'll never forget this. The doors opened inward, and in their panic they were shoving them the wrong way, throwing their whole weight against doors that would never open like that, and screaming at them. That's how people die in a crowd, by the way, not from the thing itself, from each other, from the crush at a door that opens the wrong way. And I froze. I'll be honest with you because there's no point telling this story if I lie about my own part in it. I froze. 24 years old, 3 steps into the aisle, and my legs just stopped. My mind had gone to a kind of white noise. I could see the danger, the crush at the door, the cracked glass, the smoke, and I could not make my body do a single useful thing about any of it. So I want you to understand the contrast. I want you to feel it the way I felt it, because while I stood there useless, one man in that room was already moving. Marsh didn't run to the doors. That's the first thing. Everybody's instinct, mine, theirs, everybody's, was to get out. His wasn't. His first move before anything else was 2 long strides to put himself between the cracked windows and the nearest cluster of people, between the danger and the bodies. He put himself in the gap. That's a thing I only understood later, thinking about it. A blast blows glass inward. If those windows had gone, if there'd been a second one closer, the people by that wall would have been cut to ribbons. And Marsh, without a word, without a wasted motion, had put his own back to the glass and his body between it and them. Then he spoke again, and this time it wasn't a command shouted into chaos. It was lower, slower, and somehow that made it carry further. Look at me. 3 people near the front turned, then 5, then a dozen. There's something in a voice like that, a trained voice, a voice that has clearly given orders before and been obeyed. It reaches into the animal part of your brain, the part that's screaming, and it puts a hand on its shoulder. You are safe in this room, he said. The danger is outside, not in here. Do you understand me? In here you are safe. And we are going to leave in good order, all of us, and no one is going to be hurt. But you have to listen to my voice. I watched it happen. I watched a room full of terror slow down by half a beat, just from the sound of one steady man. It wasn't magic. People were still crying. A woman near the middle was shaking so hard her jewelry rattled. But the run, that terrible tipping thing that had been about to break loose and turn everyone into a stampede, it didn't break. Marsh had caught it. He'd caught it with his voice and his body in about 4 sentences, and he held it. He turned to the doors at the back, my doors, where the tan couple were still throwing themselves uselessly against the inward-opening panels. You two, stop. They didn't stop. People in that state don't. So Marsh did the thing that made me realize what kind of man I was looking at. He didn't shout louder. He walked. Fast but not running. Running spreads panic. Running tells everyone's body to run too, and he knew that. He crossed that entire room at a hard, level march, straight up the center aisle past the fallen chairs, and he reached the doors, and he took the man by the shoulder, firm, not rough, and he moved him aside like the man weighed nothing, and he pulled the doors inward, the correct way, and they swung open into the reception hall. Out here, move to the far wall away from the street windows. Go, walk, do not run. And people went. They started to flow, not a stampede, a stream. He stood at the door and he sorted them as they came, a hand here, a word there. You're all right, keep moving. Left to the wall, you're all right. I was still standing in the aisle like a fence post. And as the crowd flowed past me toward the doors, Marsh's eyes found me across the room. I don't know what he saw, a frozen kid probably, useless, but he didn't have contempt in his face. He had something better. He had a job for me. You, he called. Porter, you work here. I got my voice back from somewhere. Yes, yes, sir. Fire exits, where are they? And thank God, that was a thing I actually knew. Something clicked back on inside me. There's a service stair, back left. Goes down to the loading door on the side street, away from the park. Away from the park. He nodded once, and I swear that nod did more for me than a medal would have. Good man, take the back half of this room down it. I'll keep the front moving through the main doors. Split them. Don't let it bottleneck. Go. And I went. I want you to notice what he did there, because I've thought about it a lot in the years since. In the middle of the worst moment of that day, with smoke in the sky and glass of breath from falling, he didn't just take charge, he gave charge. He found the most useless person in the room, the frozen boy, and he handed him a piece of the work, and in doing that he turned me from a liability into a pair of hands. That's a rare thing. Most people in a crisis, if they're strong, just do it all themselves. The truly good ones make everyone around them stronger too. Marsh did that to me in about 4 seconds, and he probably never thought about it again. I moved. God, I moved. I got to the back rows and I started pulling people up out of their crouches and pointing them at the service door. This way, down the stairs, the loading door. It comes out on the side street, away from it all. My voice was shaking, but it was working. And once a few of them started moving, the rest followed, the way sheep do, the way frightened people do. And here's the thing I keep coming back to. The whole time I was doing my little job at the back, I could hear him at the front. That low, steady voice, over and over, never rising, never cracking. You're all right, keep moving. Mind the chair. You're all right, madam, take my arm, that's it. Keep moving. It was like a lighthouse. You couldn't always see it, but you could always hear it. And as long as you could hear it, you knew which way was safe. I got the back half of that room down the service stair in, I don't know, a minute. Less. The tan couple, the museum man in the bow tie, 3 of the dealers, a knot of terrified staff. Down the stairs, through the loading bay, out into the gray, wet side street where the air smelled of smoke and rain, and away from it and safe. I stood at the top of the stairs and I counted them past me the way I'd seen him count, and I told each one, you're all right, keep moving, because that's what he'd said, and it was the only thing I knew to do, and it turned out to be the right thing. But the front of the room wasn't emptying as cleanly, because at the front of the room, 2 people had refused to leave. Lady Cordelia Ashe had not moved from her place, while everyone around her ran and cried and scrambled. She was standing rooted at the front, and she was staring at the glass case, at the crown, at the Ellsmere Crown, glowing on its little stand under the lamp, with a cracked window 10 feet away and smoke in the sky outside. And 3 feet from her, also not leaving, was Victor Halloran. I couldn't hear all of it, I was at the back, catching the tail of it over the noise, but I got enough. And Marsh got all of it, because he was right there between them and the door, and he'd stopped, because these 2 were the last knot in the room and they would not come loose. We have to take it, Lady Cordelia was saying, not to Halloran, to no one, to the crown. We can't leave it. We can't leave her crown in here with the glass and the— Madam, Marsh's voice, leave the case, come with me now. I will not leave it. And Halloran, and this is the part that still turns my stomach a little, Halloran had moved toward the case. Not to protect Lady Cordelia, to protect his purchase. In the middle of all of it, with the sky on fire outside, that calm, cold man had gone for the crown, because in his head he'd bought it, it was his, £1,000,000 of his, and he was not going to leave £1,000,000 behind for anyone. His hand was on the edge of the glass case. It's mine, he said, the hammer. The hammer never fell, Lady Cordelia said, and something in her voice had gone from grief to fury. It never fell, you don't own anything, take your hands off her crown. And she grabbed the other side of the case. And there they were, two people, one glass box, a cracked window a few feet away, and above the rooftops that column of black smoke, and both of them with their hands on the Ellsmere Crown, pulling in the worst moment of the worst day, tearing at a dead woman's crown like children over a toy. Marsh stepped in. Now, I want to tell this part carefully, because it's the part that matters most, and it's the part people don't believe. You'd think a soldier steps in and it's force. It's shouting, it's grabbing, it's pulling them apart. That's what I braced for. That's what I'd have done badly if I'd been the one there. That's not what he did. He stepped between them, between the two of them and the case, and he put one hand flat on the top of the glass, not grabbing it, just resting his hand there. A quiet ownership of the object that made both of them, for 1 second, stop pulling. And he said quietly, to both of them, in that same steady voice he'd used on the whole terrified room, "Neither of you is taking this crown out of this building right now, and I'll tell you why." He didn't wait for permission. He just kept talking, low and level, and they listened, because his was the only calm voice left in the world. "This crown belonged to Her Majesty," he said. "You both know that. You both, in your own ways, are standing here in the middle of an emergency because you can't bear to leave it. That tells me something about both of you. It tells me you both loved her, or loved what she was, more than you love your own safety. Even you, sir." He looked at Halloran when he said that, and there was no cruelty in it, but there was no softness either. "Even you." Halloran's hand had come off the glass. I don't think he'd decided to move it. I think Marsh's voice had just moved it for him. "So here is what will happen," Marsh went on. "I am the last man responsible to the crown for this object. Until it is lawfully sold, and it has not been lawfully sold, Madam is right, the hammer did not fall, it remains in the care of Her Majesty's household. Which today means it remains in the care of me. Not you, sir. Not you, madam, me." He took his hand off the glass. He stood up to his full height between them and the case, and he became, in that moment, something more than a man in a uniform. He became the thing the uniform is for. "You are both going to walk out of that door," he said, "to safety ahead of me, and I am going to stand here with Her Majesty's crown until every other living person is out of this building, and then and only then I will bring it out myself. It will not be lost. It will not be stolen. It will not be broken. You have my word as a serving guardsman of the sovereign's household, and my word, I promise you both, is the one thing in this room worth more than that crown." Silence. Even the panic outside seemed to hush for a second. And Lady Cordelia Ashe, this proud, furious, heartbroken woman who had stood up in the middle of an auction and torn the afternoon apart, she looked at that guardsman, and something in her face broke open and then, strangely, healed. "You'll bring her out," she said. It wasn't a question quite. It was a plea dressed as a statement. "I'll bring her out," Marsh said. And the way he said her, not at her, I think that's what did it. I think that one word told Lady Cordelia that this man understood exactly what the crown was, and exactly what she'd lost, better than the lawyers and the trusts and the calm, cold buyer ever could. She let go of the case. "Go now," Marsh said gently. "Both of you go." Halloran went first, fast, not a word. Whatever grand certainty he'd carried into that room, It left him in a hurry once there was nothing to buy and no one to impress, and the last I saw of him he was pushing out through the main doors into the reception hall with his shoulders up around his ears. I'll be honest, I never felt anything for that man again except a kind of cold pity. He'd have carried a dead queen's crown out over the bodies of everyone in that room, and he'd have called it his right. Lady Cordelia was slower. She stopped at the door. She turned back and looked at Marsh, standing his post beside the case exactly as he'd stood it all day, calm as still water, with the cracked window at his back and the smoke rising outside. "What's your name?" she said. "Marsh, madam, Guardsman Marsh." "Marsh." She said it like she was memorizing it, like she meant to remember it for the rest of her life, which I found out later she did. "Thank you." And she went. And then it was just Marsh, and the Crown, and me at the back of the room by the service stair, the last two people in a building with a cracked front and a burning sky outside. He looked down the length of that ruined room, and he found me still standing there. "You should be gone, son." "Everyone's out," I said. My voice sounded strange to me. "Older, maybe. Back half's down the service stair, all clear. Front's out the main doors. It's just us." He nodded slowly. And then, and I've never forgotten this, he did something I didn't expect. He looked at me for a long second, this steady, weathered, unbreakable man, and the corner of his mouth moved. The same fraction it had moved that morning when I offered him water. The tiniest ghost of it. "You did well," he said. "Back there, getting them down the stair, counting them out. You did that well." I can't tell you what those 4 words meant to a frozen, useless, 24-year-old kid who a minute earlier couldn't make his own legs work. I've been given raises and I've been given thanks, and none of it ever landed like "you did well" from that man in that room. I felt it in my chest. I still do. "Now go," he said. "Out the service stair, same as the others. I've got one more thing to do." And he turned back to the case, and he lifted the glass, and with hands as careful as a father lifting a sleeping child, Guardsman Edwin Marsh reached in and took up the Ellsmere Crown. I didn't leave. I should have. He'd told me to. But I stood at the top of the service stair and I watched because I knew, the way you know sometimes, that I was seeing something I'd never see again. He held the crown in both hands. He looked at it for just a moment, this old private thing that a queen had loved, sapphires deep as water catching the gray light. And then, I don't know how to explain this, and I've stopped trying to explain it to people who weren't there. He did a small thing that undid me completely. He held the crown against his chest, over his heart, the way you'd hold something you were protecting from the rain. And he turned toward the front of the room, toward the empty podium and the fallen chairs and the cracked window with the smoke behind it, and he gave a short, sharp bow, not to any person. There was no one there. He bowed to the room, or to the crown. Or to her, to the queen who'd worn it, who was gone, who couldn't see it, who would never know that on the worst afternoon in that building's history. One of her guardsmen stood his post to the very last second and carried her crown out over his heart while the world burned outside. And then he straightened up, and he walked toward me, calm and level, and the whole thing was over. Almost. Because it's what happened after we got outside, what I saw in that gray, wet street, and what I learned about the man. And the one last thing he did that I've never told anybody, that's the part I've been building up to this whole time. The side street was chaos of a quieter kind. We came out of the loading door, Marsh a few steps behind me, the crown held against his chest under one arm now, his coat pulled half over it against the drizzle, and the world outside had gone strange. You know how a place you know well can turn into somewhere you've never been just because of what's happened to it. That's what Mayfair looked like. Same black doors, same brass plaques, same flowers in the windows, but the air was wrong. There was smoke in it, that acrid burnt electrical smell that gets into the back of your throat, and everywhere there were sirens. Not one. Dozens, layered over each other near and far, all pulling toward the park. People stood in the street in little clumps, the way people do after something breaks, not knowing where to go. Our auction guests were among them. I saw the museum man in the bow tie, soaked through, staring at nothing. I saw two of the staff holding onto each other. The rain had stopped pretending to be light and had started coming down properly now, cold and steady, and nobody seemed to notice it. And there were police everywhere. Real ones. Armed ones, some of them, moving fast with that hard purpose that tells you it's serious. One of them peeled off toward us the moment we came out the door, hand raised, shouting for us to move away from the building, move west, away from the park, keep moving. And then he saw Marsh. I watched the whole thing shift on that policeman's face. He'd been about to bark an order at two civilians. And then he clocked the uniform and the bearing and the thing held under the coat, and he understood in a half-second that this was not a civilian, and his whole manner changed. "Sir," he said, "you need to come with me, is that?" His eyes went to the shape under Marsh's coat. "It is," Marsh said. "It needs to be secured. Household, where's your senior officer?" And just like that, the two of them were talking the fast-clipped language of people whose job is order in the middle of disaster, and I understood that Marsh had gone from being the most important man in that auction room to being one small piece of a very large machine that had just swung into motion across half of London. It humbled me a bit. In there, he'd been everything. Out here, he was one guardsman with one object, doing one part of an enormous job. And he handled that shift without a flicker, no ego in the man at all. Here's what had actually happened, by the way. I didn't learn the full shape of it for a day or two, from the news and from the sergeant who came round afterward. A device had gone off near the edge of Hyde Park. I won't dwell on the details of it, it's not that kind of story, and there are families for whom it will never be a story at all, just the worst day of their lives. People were hurt. It could have been so much worse than it was. That much came out later. It was a frightening, cruel thing, and I've never once found it in me to make it exciting or dramatic because it was real, and real is different. What I'll say is this. We were far enough from it that the auction house never faced the true force of the blast. What reached us was the edge of it, the pressure, the flash, the smoke, the cracked glass. Close enough to terrify a room full of people into a stampede. Not close enough, thank God, to do worse. If those windows had fully failed, though, if the crush at that inward opening door had gone the way crushes go, we'd have had our own casualties in that building, quite apart from what happened in the park. And we didn't. Not one person from that room was hurt. Not one. I've thought about why not one many times, and the answer always comes back to the same place. It comes back to a man who didn't run when everyone's instinct was to run, who caught a panicking room with his voice before it could turn into a crush, who found the fire exits, split the flow, and handed a frozen boy a job. 45 people walked out of that building in good order on the worst afternoon of the year, and the reason they did is that one of them wasn't afraid. Or if he was, and he must have been, he was a man, not a statue. He didn't let it move him. Not 1 inch. Not the whole day. Lady Cordelia found us in the street. I hadn't seen where she'd gone after she left the room, but she came across the wet pavement toward Marsh, and she'd lost her poise entirely now, her dark green dress soaked at the shoulders, her careful hair coming down in the rain, and she looked 10 years older and somehow younger too. Like grief had washed the sharpness off her and left just the person underneath. She stopped in front of him. She looked at the shape under his coat. "You brought her out," she said. "I said I would." And then Lady Cordelia Ashe, grandniece of a queen, a woman who'd walked into that auction house that morning armed with lawyers and fury, and a promise made in a garden, put her hands over her face and cried. Right there in the street, in the rain, in front of everyone, she cried the way you cry when something you've been holding shut for a long time finally comes open. Marsh didn't touch her. That would have been wrong, and he knew it. He just stood there, steady, letting her have the moment, holding the crown a little more carefully as if to say it's safe, it's here, it's all right. And when she got herself back, when she wiped her face and stood up straight again, he said something to her that I only half caught, but I caught the shape of it. He told her the crown would be looked after. that there was a proper process, and that in the days to come, with what had happened, that process would be looked at again by people higher than any of them. He told her gently, honestly, that he couldn't promise her the ending she wanted, that he was a guardsman, not a judge, and the question of who the crown belonged to was above him and always would be. But he told her that whatever happened, it would happen properly, in the open, with her aunt's memory treated with respect, and that no cold trust in a country with good weather was going to spirit it away in the confusion of a bad day, because he had it now, and it was going nowhere except into the right and proper hands. I don't know if that was enough for her. How could it be? She'd wanted the crown, and this man couldn't give her the crown. But I think what he could give her, he gave her fully. He gave her the truth, treated with care. He gave her the certainty that the thing she loved wasn't going to be lost in the chaos. And on a day like that, when so much had been lost, maybe that was a bigger gift than the crown itself. She nodded. She reached out, and very briefly she touched the edge of his sleeve. Then she turned and walked away into the rain, toward the police cordon, toward whatever came next for her. I never saw her again either, but I heard, years later, from that same sergeant that she wrote to the regiment, a long letter, about what a guardsman had done in a broken room on a terrible day. I like to think it was read out somewhere. I like to think it mattered. The police took the crown in the end, properly. There was paperwork even then, even in the middle of all that, a senior officer, a signature, a secure case, 2 armed men to walk it to a vehicle. Household property, secured under the correct authority. Marsh handed it over the way he did everything, without drama, without reluctance, exactly right. He'd carried it as far as his duty went, and his duty ended at the hands of the people whose duty it became. He let it go the moment, and not 1 second before, it was right to let it go. I stood a little way off and watched him do it. And when the case clicked shut and the officers walked it away toward the vehicle, Marsh watched it go, and only when it was safely gone did his shoulders come down. Just a fraction. The only sign in the whole day that the man carried any weight at all. Then he turned, and he saw me still standing there in the rain, soaked to the skin, not knowing what to do with myself. "Still here," he said. "Didn't know where to go," I admitted. He looked at me for a moment. Then he did the thing with the corner of his mouth again, that almost smile, the one that cost him nothing and meant everything. "Home," he said. "Go home, son, get dry. Ring your mother if you've got one. She'll have seen the news and she'll be climbing the walls." He paused. "And when you tell this story, and you will one day, whether you mean to or not, tell it straight. Don't make me into more than I was. I stood where I was meant to stand, and I did what I was trained to do. That's all. That's the whole of it. And here's the thing, here's the thing that stayed with me for the rest of my life." He didn't think he'd done anything special. He genuinely didn't. To him, it wasn't bravery. It was just the job. You stand your post. You keep your head. You get the people out. You bring the crown out. You hand it to the right hands. That's not heroism in his mind. That's just Tuesday. That's just what a guardsman is. But I've met a lot of people since that day. Brave ones, clever ones, powerful ones. And I've never met another person who could do what he did, hold a breaking room together with nothing but a steady voice and a straight back, and then walk away thinking it was nothing worth mentioning. I think that's what makes a man like that. Not the courage. Lots of people find courage when they have to. It's the not needing to be told he was brave afterward. The doing of it purely for its own sake, because it was right and it was his to do, and then going home and getting dry and ringing his mother's equivalent and never once expecting a medal or a mention. That's rarer than courage. That's the real thing. I did go home. I did get dry. My mother had, in fact, been climbing the walls, and I let her hold onto me for a long time in the hallway without complaining, which was not like me at 24. I went back to work 3 days later when they reopened. The front window was boarded. The room still smelled faintly of smoke. Mr. Pemberton was subdued for weeks and never used his little joke about the crown jewels again. The auction, of course, was called off. The sale of the Ellsmere Crown was suspended, pending review, which is the sort of phrase that means the world got involved and this is above all of us now. I don't know in the end what happened to the crown. That's the honest truth. I've never been able to find out for certain and I've stopped trying. Maybe it went to a museum where anyone who loved her can see it. Maybe there was a settlement, quiet, the way these things are settled. Maybe Lady Cordelia got her promise honored after all and the crown sits in a house somewhere with someone who loved the woman who wore it. I hope that one. I choose to believe that one. But the crown was never really the point. I understood that even then, standing wet in that street. The crown was just the thing the day happened around. The point was the man. I looked for Marsh afterward. Not hard, I didn't know how, and it felt like prying. But I asked the sergeant who came round to take statements whether Guardsman Marsh was all right, and the sergeant gave me a funny look and said he was, and that he'd been commended quietly, in the way the regiment commends its own. No parade, no newspaper, just a note in a record somewhere and the respect of the men who understood exactly what he'd done. That fit, that was exactly the ending he'd have wanted. Nothing loud, just the truth treated with care, kept where it belonged. I never saw him again. I've looked for that face in the crowd outside the palaces 100 times over the years on trips into town, standing at the railings with the tourists. The straight back, the stillness. I've never found him. He'd have moved on, been posted elsewhere, left the service, grown old the way we all do. He's probably a gray-haired grandfather somewhere now, if he's still with us, telling far less exciting stories to children who have no idea that the quiet man reading them, a bedtime tale, once held a breaking room together with nothing but his voice, and carried a dead queen's crown out over his heart while London burned. I hope somebody looks after him the way he looked after all of us that day. So that's the story. That's the whole of it, straight the way he told me to tell it. People still lean back with that little smile when I get to the end. Sure, mate, and I let them. I don't need them to believe it. I know what I saw. I saw a room full of the richest, calmest people in London come apart in a single second. I saw grief and greed tearing at a dead woman's crown. I saw a bomb turn the sky black over the park. And through all of it, every second of it, I saw one man who would not move, who stood his post when there was nothing to gain and everything to lose, who found the frightened and steadied them, found the frozen and gave them a job, found the last knot in the room and untied it with the truth. And then bowed to an empty room and carried her out over his heart and went home and thought it was nothing. I've spent a whole life trying to be, for even 1 hour, the kind of man he was for one afternoon. I don't think I've managed it, but I keep his 4 words in my pocket, and I take them out when things are bad and they still work. You did well. Some men wear a crown. A rarer few are trusted to carry one, and are worth more than the thing they carry. Guardsman Marsh was one of those. And that's why, all these years later, I still can't tell this story at dinner parties. Because every time I get to the end of it, I'm the one who has to look away.